Hello friends, and welcome to my Stitch and Addiction channel. Whether you are new or returning, I'm so glad that you're here. I have been working on a project called Becoming Jo March, and I have a series I'm doing on YouTube for that. And in conjunction with that series, I am doing this second series outlining the undergarments that someone like Jo March would have worn underneath her clothes. So I'm going to start from the inside out. And so today will be the 1860s chemise. If you're truly starting from the inside out, you would need a pair of split drawers, which I actually have on under the chemise. I did not draft these split drawers on my own. I found instructions on how to draft them and construct them on Liz Clark's Sewing Academy site, so I will link that below. I highly recommend it. It was fairly easy to follow her instructions and to complete the drawers. So I highly recommend that if you are looking for a split drawer pattern and you want to draft your own, that you would use hers. So I'm not going to do the split drawers in this series. I would just recommend you hop over to her site with the link below and do your split drawers that way. So the next garment would be the chemise. Now, I am going to give a word of warning here. This chemise is a more complicated chemise. I have seen some that are quite simple. They look about like a peasant top pattern that has a yoke on them, or some of them are even simpler than that, and they have simply a drawstring in them instead of the elastic like we would do in our peasant tops now. And if you are a beginning seamstress or are not up for a sewing challenge, I would recommend that you do one of those. Here's a couple of examples of extant chemises that are more simple. And you can even just buy a pattern from one of the big three and use it. I've linked a peasant top pattern below from one of the big three companies that's fairly easy to adjust into one of these chemises. Now, if you are up for a sewing challenge or you just want to see how I constructed this, I am glad that you are still here. This one took me about 7 hours to make. I have about 30 years of sewing experience, and I will say it was one of the more challenging undergarments that I have tackled besides hoop skirts. So the pattern actually comes from this book right here, 60 Civil War era fashion patterns. I've linked it below. You can find it on Amazon. I regularly see it in D-stash groups. It's published by Dover, so you can also go get it from Dover. And all it is a republished patterns from Peterson's magazine during the 1860s in the United States. And so the very first pattern in there is this chemise right here. And you can see all the pin tucking and the insertion lace and the different things. Now, some of these patterns have measurements on them, and so you actually have a starting point, right? But this one does not, and let me show you. You can see I penciled in some measurements, but if you look at the original pattern, there are no measurements on it. So I took my own measurements and penciled in some measurements to help me create this chemise. So I'm going to walk you through step by step how I did that. But first I want to talk to you about supplies so that you can gather whatever supplies you want before you start making it. This is a Pima cotton batiste from Farmhouse Fabrics. I have linked it below. You can also use cotton lawn if you would prefer, and there's multiple places to get that. I would recommend one of those two fabrics for your chemise. The rest of the supplies that I used are actually vintage from D-stash groups. So the insertion that is right here, it's actually eyelet, more like eyelet than actual lace, which is good because it will hold up to wear and tear better than lace. Is cotton, and that is vintage. The edging right here that I've run the ribbon through is also cotton vintage trim, and then the actual ribbon is a satin vintage ribbon. Now, if you cannot find these vintage or you want to start with new, I also recommend Farmhouse Fabrics for all of those supplies, as they have all of those things. So go have a look on their website. So those are the supplies that you need. I had 2 yards of the Pima cotton batiste, so that's about how much yardage you're going to need, and it was 60 inches wide. Now I am tall, I'm almost 5'10", so you can keep that in mind. If you're shorter than me, you might not need 2 yards. You might can get by with a little bit less, but I would say 2 yards is a good figure to start with. So gather your supplies, gather your paper that you use to draft patterns, whatever you use. I use Alvin tracing paper from Amazon. I've linked that below as well, but I know everybody has their own preferences. So go ahead and gather your supplies and get ready to draft this pattern. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is take some measurements so that you can make sure that this will fit you correctly. And so I am going to start with the little top bodice piece. So as you can see, it's meant to kind of slant off of the shoulders. You can always pull the string up and make it go on your shoulders if you want, but you also want that ability to take it off the shoulders if you're wearing it under an 1860s ball gown, because those 1860s ball gowns would have gone off the shoulders, okay? So you want to start by measuring your width right here. So you're gonna do your high bust measurement. And so you want to just kind of measure from the inside of your armhole to about here, and that gives you how long you want this piece to be that goes right across here. And then I would just write it directly on the pattern in the book like I did. Remember that if you're cutting it on the fold, it's half of that, and that's what it shows in the book. It only shows half of it, so you can divide it in half and put it on there. Remember to add your seams if you like to add your seams when you're drafting your patterns like I do, those kind of things. The other measurement you need is you're going to need about how deep do you want this, and this piece goes up and over. If you can see, it goes up and over your shoulder, and it's made from the actual insertion lace. So what I did was I actually just made these pieces super long, and they were too long. I had to cut off an inch or two, I think, when I was done, so that it was plenty long. Also, that also gives you the ability to draw it up with the ribbon. So obviously you can't pull this down too far, because then this part starts constricting your bust. But you do want to have a little bit of flexibility to pull it up or lower it down a little bit depending on the neckline of the dress that you're wearing. At least I like having that flexibility. I like to make things that can be worn with as many outfits as possible, and so I try to build in some flexibility there. So you're going to need that measurement. So basically from here all the way up and over where you want that to end. You can kind of see where mine ends in the back. And like I said, I would make it longer rather than shorter. Just to give you an idea of some measurements, I'll share mine. I am a women's size, like a Mrs. off the rack, usually about a size 10. A little closer to a 12 right now. That pandemic weight has got me. And like I said, I'm almost 5'10", so keep that in mind. I do have a super short waist for my height, and so my waist is actually closer to the average woman's waist length, but my legs are what makes my height. So just so you know, kind of as a reference point. So if I measure across here, I am about 16 inches here. And I do have pretty narrow shoulders for my height and my size, just as an FYI as well. When I did this, I believe from where the insertion lace starts down here, I believe, if I remember correctly, but let me measure really quickly. I cut them 14 inches to begin with, and then I ended up cutting off just a little bit, and then of course you had seams. Now they go at a slant. I don't know how well you can see, but it goes at a slant up and over all the way, like that. Okay? So that's the measurements for that. Now I did not do the curve right here like it shows in the original pattern. If you want to get really fancy, be my guest, but I was just trying to generally copy it, and then the straight was easier for me to achieve. And what I did, as you'll see later, is I literally would tuck these in squares, cut them into triangles, and then I just pieced them until in between the insertion lace until I got the width I needed across here. Then the next measurement you're going to need is you're going to need to decide how wide do you want to make the body pieces of the chemise, so the major part, right? So the way I figure that out is I do about 1.5 times of my bust. So I measure across my bust, line, and then I multiply that 1.5 times, and then that's the measurement that I'm going to use across here. And so the measurement that I ended up using was I ended up doing 25 inches all the way across here. And then I did the exact same thing for the back. Now, I know some people, they get bothered if the chemise is too full in the back. So if you're someone like that, then you can make it a little narrower in the back. I also am trying to remember where I saw it, but I saw a really cool thing. I think it was on Liz Clark's website. So look at her chemise instructions. She shows you how you can cut out a section in the back top so that there's not too much bulk under your corset, but it still retains the fullness over your back rear. So if you're someone that bothers, I would definitely look into those options. But it doesn't bother me, so I just do it that way. Now, for your armhole depth, I know that in general my armholes tend to be about 20 inches around. And so I want half of that, of course, in the front. And then about 7 inches of that is taken up by this little bodice piece. And so then I know that I need to just cut in down here about 3 inches to curve in for the armhole. And just cut in a little bit. I didn't use any specific science as far as how far I cut in right here. I just kind of eyed it. Then the last thing is your length. So how long do you want it to be? So this is going to hit your high bust, and so then you want to figure out how long do you want your chemise to be. I would measure over your bust so that it's at the longest point, because if you just measure from down your back, that's not quite as long of a measurement. So I would measure down. I like mine to hit right about my knee. And so that was about 32 inches for me. And then of course add your seams and your hem. These little curved sleeve things, like I said, they're a very weird pattern piece, and I'll show you in a minute how I drafted them. But I was not convinced they were going to work, but they did really well, and I really liked the way they came out. But what's important to know when drafting these is basically just know how big around are your armholes typically. And keep in mind too that historical fashion, the armholes were tighter to the arm than our fast fashion is now. The fashion we're used to, the ease we're used to now. So it's okay, as long as they're not somebody that bothers, it's okay to go a little bit smaller in your armhole than bigger. So that's the measurements you're going to need. So go ahead and get those measurements together, jot them down on some paper somewhere, jot them on your pattern, in your book, or whatever you're comfortable with before we start drafting. So the very first pattern in here is actually a chemise from 1860. And so it gives you what the finished garment will look like. It gives you some instructions, and then it gives you the pattern drawings right here. And as you can see, I've taken some measurements and drawn them on here. So I put my corset on and measured myself to kind of see, okay, how long do I need, for example, this shoulder piece to come? And it looks like it's supposed to kind of go a little bit off the shoulder. And how wide can I make this in order to fit correctly but not constrict my bust when I put on the corset? And I also, of course, don't want this neckline to come up too high and show out of any dresses. And then, you know, about how wide do I need to make this for my bust? How long do I need to make it? How deep do I need to make the armhole? I'm not going to be doing the gore. I'm just going to cut more of a slant on here. And I'm not going to do this fancy curve along here. I'm going to make this piece straight, and I'm going to make this straight as well. So my back of my chemise and my front of my chemise will essentially look the same, except that the back will come up just a little bit higher on the top, because if you look at the picture, you can see that the front has this, which I'm going to say is about 2 inches wide finished, whereas the back just has the trim. So you need to add about 2 inches roughly to the top of the back to make them meet. So I'm going to begin drafting the pattern piece for this, and the front and back, and then the sleeve. All right, the first piece that I'm going to draft is the main body of the chemise. So when I measured across the fullest part of my bust with my corset on, I need the fullness to be at least 25 inches in the front. Of course, I want some ease in there as well, and so I'm going to add about a quarter of that measurement, so that would be about 6 inches to the 25 inches. And then of course I need to add my seams, which I'm going to do 1/2 inch seams to make this easy. So we're looking at about 32 inches. I'm going to make the fold along here, and so I'm going to do 1/2 of those 32 inches on here. So that's going to be, I'm going to come out 16 inches to the top of the body of the chemise, and I'm going to make the back and the front exactly the same. I'm going to add 2 inches along the top for the back and then just fold it down when I cut out the front piece for that little bodice piece that runs across the front. And then as far as the width of the chemise, I'm just going to actually make it the width of this paper, which is 24 inches. I'm making this out of cotton lawn, and so it is 60 inches wide. And so if you're planning on using a fabric that's only 44 inches wide or 45 inches, 42 inches, somewhere in there, make sure that you either consider adding a gore if you want yours to be super full at the bottom, or just make sure you draw this slant less than what I'm going to be drawing it. So I'm going to have this come down. The armhole needs to come down about 3-ish inches on the front, and then of course I'm adding that 2 inches across the top for the back. So let me draw my 2 lines. So this is the front cutting line right here. And if you don't want to be like me and you want to have separate pattern pieces, please feel free to draw your separate pattern pieces. I like to conserve paper, and honestly, I'm kind of lazy because I don't like having to redraw all these pieces twice. And so that's why I often will combine something big like this on the same pattern and then just draw lines that I'm going to use slightly differently for the other one. So there's the top of the back and then the top of the front, and then it will come down to the armhole. When I'm looking at the armhole, there is a very slight slant out. I'm going to guess it's about 1 inch from looking at that. None of this is super scientific. I have not found a super scientific way to do any of this. So if you have one, please let me know. I'm very open to new ideas, but this is just from years and years of cutting from patterns drawn by other people, and then I just kind of eye it. And then I want my chemise length to be about 32 inches from the front line. I'm going to add, of course, seams, so that's going to add another inch. Plus, I'm going to add 1 or 2 inches more just because my first chemise, I cut it a little bit too short, and I've always regretted that. And so I'm a little bit loath to cut them short or on the short side. So usually what I'll do is I'm just going to add, I'm going to make it 36 inches to make it easy. Alright, so I ended up making that 36 inches from the front line, so it'll be 38 inches on the back. I'm 5'9", so I want it to be long enough, and I'll cut off the excess. So your last step for cutting this, or drawing this, is you're just going to slant from your hem line up to your armhole line, and then just draw your one continuous slanted line. The very last thing you might want to do when drawing this part of your chemise is you may want to curve up the bottom of the hem. You can see where my original line is in that corner, and then you can see how I curved it up almost 2 inches, because otherwise your sides will hang down longer than your center. There's 2 reasons for that. One, if you measure that slanted side seam, it's longer when you use the straight line across the bottom. And 2, there's more in the middle front of your body taking up length space, specifically your boobs, as opposed to the side seam. There's no real bumps there to take up space, and so it hangs straighter. Alright, I wanted you guys to be able to see the body of the chemise pattern laid out on the fabric. As you can see along the top edge, I folded down the 2 inches because this is the front one that I'm cutting out. and then I will unfold that when I cut out the back one. All right, you can see they don't give us a lot to go on when it comes to the sleeve. Obviously, it's got a curve there. It's half of the sleeve. The bottom is slightly wider than the top. I'm going to assume because you want to make sure you have plenty of fabric under the underarm to protect the dress from the sweat and everything, body oils. So I was just kind of glancing around looking for something to help me draw that curve on that sleeve, and I realized that my handy cutting board actually has a curve right here. So I measured the length of my armholes, which my armholes run about 18 to 20 inches finished around the whole thing. I've learned that through much trial and error in sewing. And so I measured this inner curve right here, and it's right about the right length to be the half of my sleeve. Now I will cut my sleeve on a fold. I will cut the top edge on a fold right here so that I'm not having to sew a seam there, just for less bulk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trace that curve, and then I want the top edge of my sleeve to be 2 inches finished. So I'll just draw this out 2 inches and then add each inch on each side for the seam, so 3 inches. And then I want the bottom to be about 3 inches finished. So I will draw it out about 4 inches and curve it. All right, I have attempted to draw the sleeve. Now I am not 100% happy with it. I am not sure how it's actually going to work. The curve seems a little much to me, but I pulled out my French curve right here, and I don't really see a better curve to try to use. So I figure if all else fails, I will just cut straight strips of fabric to attach to the armholes, add a little bit of gathers or something to make them fit in, and call it good. But we will try this first. Okay friends, I wanted to show you the adjustment I ended up making to the sleeve when I actually cut it, and I was very happy with the way it came out. So when I went to lay my sleeve pattern on the fold of the fabric, I realized it curved down like that, and I've never seen a sleeve that actually curves down at the top of it. So what I ended up doing was drawing this straight out. You could also even curve it up a little bit, because sleeve caps normally curve up, but I cut mine straight and it was perfectly fine, and so I think you will be fine enough because the curve starts right here anyways. But I did want to show you guys what I ended up adjusting on the sleeve so that you can do the same thing with yours. So as you can see, the little front, I'm just going to call it bodice piece, it's not really fully a bodice, but is pretty complicated because you can see it has the little tucked triangles, and then it has insertion in between it, and it has this extra curve that makes it get wider as it goes toward the center. I'm not going to make it have a curve or go wider. I'm going to go straight across. The only thing I'm going to do that doesn't make it just straight across is I'm going to leave this insertion piece out long so it goes up and over the shoulder. So I had to do a little experimenting before I could explain to you guys how to do this. The one thing to know is whenever you're tucking fabric, it's ideal to put the tucks in the fabric before you cut out the piece. Because as hard as you may try to be precise with your tucks, it's possible they could get slightly off and then your piece would not be exactly the size that you need it to be. So it's easiest to just tuck it first and then cut it to what you need it to be. So that's what I've done with this first section right here. I took a 5-inch strip of the cotton lawn right here, and I just tucked it with 1/4 inch tucks over and over and over again. And then when I had a 5-inch square, I cut it in half, so I had 2 triangles, and then inserted the insertion in between it, so that now I have the first piece for the little front bodice. And then it looks like I'm going to need about 5 triangles to make that front piece, and so I'm going to do another one and continue on. Alright, so I figured out the bodice. Like I said, I did not curve it. I was just going to make it straight across. I'm going to add some trim across the top that I can run ribbon in to pull it up whenever I need it a little pulled in. I was not exact in the way that I had my tucks go. As you can see, these all go the same basic ways, but this one and this piece are kind of going odd directions, but I'm not really concerned because probably even more of them will get cut off when I connect it for the armhole area, and so there's not a lot that's actually going to be left on there and be seen. And then you can see that the straps are obviously way too long, but I wanted them to be on the longer side so that I can adjust them once I get them on there. And then of course I will put the sleeve in right here. But the next step is that I'm going to put the trim across the edge up here to finish that edge off. And then I'm going to gather and attach the front body of the chemise right here, so that both edges of this are finished off. Alright, the bodice is completely done. I ran some beading along the top edge and the shoulders, and I will run some ribbon through that so that it can be drawn up to fit exactly. And then I actually did line it. That's why there's all these pins here. So you can see I lined it with the cotton lawn, just mostly for stability in the shoulder seams and then for it to look nice on the inside. I know historically they weren't always worried about it looking nice on the inside, but that bothers me some. Also, this will probably not stay exactly like this. I will probably actually cut this and curve it in once I attach it to the body of the chemise and start playing around with the sleeves. Alright, so I gathered the front body of the chemise to the bodice piece, and then I gathered the back body of the chemise to some of the beading. See right here, I need to run some ribbon through it. And then I tried it on to see if the straps were too long, too short. Now, if you want to make your straps on the long side and you're putting beading on like I did, that's going to work out fine because you can always pull them up shorter or longer depending on the neck of the dress you're wearing and all those other things. But I realized that I didn't want them as long as they were because I would never be able to let them out that full anyways, no matter the neck on my dress, because then this comes down too far on my bust line, and that's not going to work because this isn't as wide as my bust, and so then it wouldn't work inside the corset. So that's why I went ahead, and as you can see I have these pinned down pretty far. I'm going to chop them off and stitch them in. Alright, so after I had stitched that part on, I actually didn't video any more of the process, but it was pretty straightforward. So the next thing you want to do is you're just going to set your sleeves in, which I've already shown you how to pattern them. Remember that the widest part of the sleeve goes under the arm so that you're protecting the underarm of your dress, which is a big part of the reason for wearing a chemise. And then you want to attach your beading on the edge and run your ribbon through it. Now, I attached the beading before doing the underarm and the side seam, so that makes it easier. If you want to attach your beading after you've done the seam, that makes a slightly neater finish, but I wasn't super worried about it because the ribbon just runs right through there and kind of holds the seam in place and everything, and I have a surgeon, so I just serged everything off so the seams look nice. And then of course after that all that's left is hemming the chemise at the length that you want it. So of course try it on and make sure that the length is not too long for you, and then hem it. I like to put about a 1/2 inch hem in it. So that was the rest of the steps in order to complete the chemise. Thank you for watching and joining me on this sewing adventure today. I hope that this was helpful to you as you create your own 1860s chemise. If you have questions or comments, I would love to hear them below, so leave them in the comment section below. If you are interested in following along, the next video will be on how I made my 1860s corset. Spoiler alert, I did use a pattern for that. I used Red Threaded's pattern, so if you want to be able to sew along with me as I do the next video, go ahead and order all your supplies in the pattern, and I will be publishing that video soon, so check back. If you are interested in the Becoming Jo March project, I recommend that you check out my Becoming Jo March videos and that you follow me on Instagram because I give frequent updates about the project in between publishing the videos. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe if you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time. Happy sewing!